Right, welcome. This is a overview, rules review, and maybe setup if we have enough time of recently released game Case Geld, Axis Invasion of North America, 1945. Came out in Compass Games Paper War issue 101, which I think at the moment is the most recent issue, but that may change rather quickly. And basically, yes, it is simulating an invasion of North America by the Germans in the Atlantic and the Japanese in the Pacific. Design and development, Ty Bamba. Uh, some similarities to a game I just finished of his. That was in Strategy and Tactics issue 333, Operation Unthinkable, where the Allies actually attempt to overrun East Germany at the end of World War II, trying to get to Poland. And you can see previous videos for that. So you'll see some rules parallels here. I view this as my Ty Bamba alternate history duo here. Except this one turned around. If you got the Paper Wars 101, they give the historical background. And cut to the chase, Dunkirk didn't happen. Hitler got more aggressive and said, let's trap them all. Burned up his army to do it, but pretty much annihilated the British army at that time. So that drove them to the peace table with the French, and then they agreed later to help take out Russia. And Japan also didn't go to Pearl Harbor. They also joined the Germans and the Europeans in attacking Russia, which was then ultimately crushed. With no Pearl Harbor, the U.S. never got into the war. So here we are in 1945, and both the Germans and the Japanese are planning to invade the United States. So that's the background, and I do have I put together a VAS module based on some graphics I found on BGG. They aren't the greatest of graphics, but they are more than adequate for the task at hand until the official VASA module is released. So let's go ahead and look at the rules, and I've got the Vassal mod in the back. We can take a look at the game components here. And if you look, it looks to be approximately 11 pages in length, although there's charts at the end. But that's manageable. So they come down here, alternate history. Key turning point was Dunkirk evacuation did not occur, so they both went to the peace tables. Each hex is 50 miles across. U.S. units are core, while the Axis and German units are armies. We can see that here. As long as I've got this up, let's take a look at the map. And it does cover the entire United States, cutting off at the northern part of Mexico here. Pretty much got Florida down to Miami. Cuba is off board. There's the Axis units. And it does come all the way up to almost all of Maine, and then some of northern Canada up here. Interesting thing I found for me personally is if you get the actual physical game, yes, the maps do kind of look like this, and I actually live somewhere here on the terrain effects chart, so they was kind of excited about invading where I lived, but well, that's a physical impossibility on this map, but that's okay. And the terrain is pretty simple on the map. So you can see from the terrain effects chart, you've got clear, it's a shade of green, you've got rough, and you've got mountains. There you go. And then you got cities. DC has moved to Tulsa, hence the new District of Columbia. The U.S. is divided into two theaters, east and west. Here's the dividing line. You'll see we'll divide the units up that way too. Here are all the charts here. It uses differential combat results, not odds. I keep track of cities. Victory is somewhat measured by how many cities, or if the Axis do succeed in taking new District of Columbia, that'll do it too. We'll see later. Airdrops, the Germans and the US have an airborne army or corps, respectively, that can be used. And the US has the Manhattan Project, so atomic bombs can be dropped, but not in large numbers, and their effect is not greatly pronounced. It just reduces unit strengths and temporarily takes hexes offline. So that's the map. Let's come back to the rules here. So we've covered that. Each game turn is about 1 or 2 months. Okay. Compass directions definition. Yeah, theater of operations. And this is similar to Battle for Germany, I believe, where you did this kind of split where each side takes one of the other side, so to speak. So the Japanese player also is the Eastern U.S. player, trying to slow the Germans down, and the German player is the Western U.S. player. Okay, so you kind of get that split competition going on, but that's only for 2 players. If you go to 3 players, they do talk about it later, but 3 players, then you have a German, a Japanese, and a U.S. And if you go to 4, you can even split the U.S. in half, but still a German and a Japanese. But you've got those theaters of operations, and when units are assigned, they must stay on their theater of operations. And then, yeah, they go into a little historical stuff here. Components, unit counters, standard attack, defense, movement factor. There are elite units on all sides. They normally have the white values for their factors here. See, that's true across US, Japan, and Germany. Black for regular units. The other interesting point is the all German, well, they're armies, so hence they're 2-steppers, regular units. Elite units have 4 steps. Kind of saw that in Unthinkable also with, but the 2, well, at least one of the airborne corps in on his other game I just played. And then the US units, yeah, so the Axis Elite have 4 steps. Axis Regular have 2 steps. US Elites have 2 steps, Marines and 18th Airborne. And then the US regular units only have 1 step, and we'll see that they are actually, yeah, they're unknown until this is, we put them in a cup here, and all the regular corps can be varying of value, and you don't know until they go in combat for the first time. So that's an interesting twist there. And then you have different recognition. You see, at least on the U.S. side, they do have an ANZAC condition, an ANZAC unit, British Expeditionary Force, got some Canadian corps, got a Mexican corps, and then the Japanese have a special North American Expeditionary Army amongst their normal armies, and of course there is the SS. These are the unit types. Marines, airborne, fully motorized, put the dots up here instead of underneath. That could be Panzer, well, we'll see. Mech infantry, that's Panzer Grenadier. Armor, partial, and the Germans do have a mountain corps, or a mountain army, 20th Mountain Army. And here's an interesting rule, but it only really applies to the Axis. There are replacements, there are reinforcements, but for the Axis units, if one of their units is fully eliminated, it cannot re-enter play. It can't come back with replacements. So, probably in the Axis best interest not to have that happen. But that doesn't necessarily apply to the U.S. As U.S. units are eliminated, they're thrown back in the cup, and as the U.S. spends replacement points, randomly pulls them back out of the cup, and because they're 1-steppers, they're only 1 replacement point. Now, of course, the Allied, or U.S. I should say, elite units do have 2 steps, so if they're reduced and on the board, and in a city, and in supply, they can be reinforced. So that's an interesting point there. Yeah, and only 1 Japanese unit is 4 steps. There's only 1 elite Japanese unit. You'll see the Japanese units are pretty much all infantry. No special armor, and there's their 1 elite unit there. where the Germans are entirely different. Maybe I should split this here. We see with the Germans, these units are all, and I've got to get the 20th Mountain in here. They're all 4-step, and then they do have panzer armies and a bunch of infantry. So they do outnumber the U.S., but they got to get them ashore. And they're only allowed one beach invasion, we'll see. And then each city has a garrison. Now, this is the marker I could put on it. I'm not going to. I'm just going to wait until the Germans or the Japanese get it and then put the marker on the hex. But that implies the garrison unit has 1 strength point, 1 step. It doesn't exert ZOC outside of it, but the Germans will ultimately, or the Axis will have to take every city and destroy that. And then when they get control, they have their garrison unit signified by their control marker. The only unique hex is New DC. No U.S. units can be placed in it, and the Axis need to advance after combat, and it's got a 6 strength garrison, which we'll see later also gets a 2 left shift, and there's no way to surround it. So this is the goal. This could be one way to win for the Axis to take this hex, Tulsa here. So we covered that. Some other special markers. We'll talk about the Axis invasion. Japanese and Germans each get 1. That's their initial supply source. It's where they land. But then they can use any coastal ports, coastal cities on either the Atlantic for the Germans or the Pacific. Germans can't use the Gulf of Mexico. U.S. has limited air power, limited projection, roll 4 every turn. The Manhattan Project, depending on how many of these hexes exist, will generate potentially 1 atom bomb per turn that can be used. A successful atomic attack does leave a mushroom behind. So the setup, as we described, Western Theater of Operations, Eastern Theater of Operations, U.S. units first. Basically, there's 6 elite U.S. units. Both sides, the West and the East, roll. High Die gets the 18th Airborne, so with the airborne capabilities. The other one gets the remaining 3 Marines, so they each get 3 elites, and then approximately, well, pretty sure 16. Divide them right down the middle. There's 32 non-elite unknown strength units, and each one gets 16, which you draw out of the cup. I could place all the control markers down, but I don't need to. I'll just say anything without a control marker is U.S. until taken. And he placed the 6 Manhattan markers under the hexes. I believe 3 on each. They've got designated hexes, so that potentially becomes a target of the Axis to prevent the creation of atomic bombs by the United States. Kind of like the V1 sites in France. Interesting parallel there. So there we go, 16, 16, and 3 elites, and they get to set up on both sides. Then the Axis on the first turn do their invasion, and all they get is 1 beachhead hex with 3 units. Okay, and they place it offshore. If there's nobody in the hex, they automatically land. If there is somebody, they have to exert combat. And the Axis also have their airborne corps, which they could conceivably use in that combat by dropping behind it, as long as they can't drop, I believe, an EZOC, or we'll see that later, EZOC or Rougher Mountain. So you'd have to think now, wherever we put the beachhead marker, you know, it would be nice to get a port. And that would be a lot of these, like Boston is a port. I don't think Providence is, Heartland. New York is definitely a port. Baltimore can be a port, but you got to capture all of this. Norfolk definitely, Wilmington, Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville. These look all tempting here. My initial blush looking as the Germans would be, southeast looks a lot better than, wow, this, but there's a lot of points to be had up here, so we'll see. These are interesting too. These are inland waterways. So let's say if I controlled New Orleans, and there was no enemy all the way up to Memphis, I could just do an inland waterway move right up there, or wherever I can, as long as I don't go near, and the U.S. can do that too, as long as I don't go to enemy Ezoc or adjacent to an enemy city. So potentially I could float all the way up the Mississippi to Minneapolis if I wanted to, unopposed. Don't know how that's going to affect movement, but so the Axis do that. They place, and then they can invade. I didn't mention that too. The Japanese can invade anywhere from here to here, although I don't know why I'd invade down here. So they can do that. That's pretty much the entire coast there. And then the Germans can invade from here down to Miami, so they can place their beachhead and units anywhere along here. Okay. So let's see, that's set up, and they've got to fight their way ashore if there are units where they're going. Yep, and they said for it. Those are all good. So we go to the how to win. The Axis win if they advance after combat into Tulsa, either the German or the Japanese, and that's, if you're playing like two players, that's the side that wins, the German or the Japanese. The U.S. get a southern death if on turn 1 either one of the invasion forces fails to get ashore. Hence, you're probably motivated not to do a somewhat opposed invasion because you could lose it all right there. And then at the end of the game, if Tulsa has not been taken, and there's variable end, 23 or more city points. If both sides have 23, there apparently is 45 on each side. I'll have to count it. But if an Axis side at the end of the game has 23 or more city points, they win. If both, then the one having the higher number does. If neither, the U.S. has won. Okay. Yeah, city control track, we're putting that out. They give this kind of optional one if an Axis power could capture all the cities in their theater, just not Tulsa. That could be a sudden death also. There's nothing for Tulsa to rule. Alright, let's move into the turn sequence. This is where we start seeing some parallels to Operation Unthinkable. I mean, it's the same designer developer. Except for turn 1, the game turn starts with a U.S. strategic phase. And that's where the air power steps basically roll 1d6 for each theater, divide by 2, and that's how many air power points the U.S. have. Then the U.S. can do replacements, and if they have them, atomic bombs. I think this is where you calculate them and drop them, but you can collect them too. Then it's a German player turn, and then they can do, we saw this with Unthinkable, they can either do move combat, or they can be combat, then move. And actually, when we read the rules, they can also do combat, and then whatever they pick, and then replacement, reinforcement. Placement to replace units taking losses on the board. Reinforcements are the remaining units left. I think they can bring in approximately 6 per turn through ports and breachhead marker. Eastern U.S. player then goes after the German, movement combat, combat movement, or combat combat. Then the Japanese, movement combat, combat movement, or combat combat, and then replacement. And then the Western U.S., same thing. So we do see here, and then the admin phase, a little cleanup. And we do see here in 5-3, move fight, or fight move, or fight fight. That's what I was just saying. So that fight fight is different from Operation Unthinkable. Okay. Let's see, play as one phase. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And if you do lead, if your first phase is a fight, either fight move or fight fight, all his attacks considered prepared and get a 1-hour shift. Okay. The fight move phase sequence, all his attacks are considered prepared. And we'll get to that in 12.0. Game turn 1 special rules. No strat phase, like we talked about. Instead, it's the initial invasions. And then they talk about they have to fight their way ashore if they have to. And then when it's the U.S. movement, they don't get their full movement factor. Each unit or stack of units rolls 1d6. And that's how many movement factors. So I guess that's introducing the delay in response. Then the admin phase. Clean things up and remove mushrooms. Okay. We'll see that mushroom clouds. They don't stick around for the entire game. Because each turn is a 1 month or 2 months, their effect goes away. So if, for example, if it was a port, well, there's a mushroom cloud, the Axis couldn't use it for landing or supply, but after a while, that'll go away and they can start using it that way again. And then the final turn, starting on turn 9, roll 1d6. If the result is a 1, the game is over. And then turn 10, if it isn't, you go to turn 10, and at the end of turn 10, if you roll a 1 or 2. And then the end of turn 11, if you roll a 1, 2, or 3. And taking it out, you see that the game won't end. Well, the game will definitely end by 14 using that pattern, so it's kind of variable ending there. Air power, did talk about that. Roll 1d6, and then you have it, and that's how many air power points you have. And then with air power, basically what it does is you put it down anywhere on the map, and then in the hex it's in and the 6 surrounding, it has effects on Axis movement, adding 1 MP, and combat, giving a, depending on if the US are attacking or defending, a 1L or 1R shift. And it also prevents an airdrop from the Germans, too. Yep, there you go. And also, it makes the likelihood of an 18th airborne drop being successful more likely if you do it in a hex that has an air power effect. Okay. And then at the end of the turn, you remove them, and you do it all over again. So limited air power effect for the U.S. Some interdiction and combat close air support, and preventing airborne drops or assisting airborne drops for the U.S. side. So we move into stacking, and pretty much the Axis are armies, so there's only 3 that can stack. That's where we get the 3 during the invasion too. But the U.S. are corps, so they can stack up to 6. Interesting, garrisons do count. So a city is either garrisoned by the U.S. or by the Axis, so they're always going to count as 1. None of the other markers do. There's no hidden stacks, and nothing to stacking order either. Zone of control, 6 surrounding hexes except for lakes, but there is a freeze turn. I think it's December, January. So most of the lakes in the north are frozen. So then it could have an effect. Garrison units don't project a ZOC except for Tulsa, 6 strength points. Yeah, turn 6, December, January, winter freeze, except for the Great Salt Lake and Lake Okeechobee. That's in Florida, I think. Yeah. Well, we all know where the Salt Lake is. It's in, let's look at this. Yeah, there we go. That never freezes. And that never freezes. But these up here do freeze. Okay. So, could have an effect. Depending on what's going on. Alright, here's the, and then there's the Grand and Cooper Canyons. Never extends across any canyon hexes. I should find those. Let's see what they look like. I don't see them. Oh, here it is, Grand Canyon, right there. So ZOCs don't extend, and I don't think you can move across them either. Okay. And what's the effect of enemy ZOC? If you enter an enemy ZOC, you must stop movement immediately. If you leave it, you have to go to a non-EZOC then before you go into an EZOC. Different than Unthinkable, where you can bleed your way through. But we'll see later with a probing attack, you can still do that. It does block supply, but this is negated by a friendly unit. There is no retreat in the combat results table, so there's no question about what effect does EZOC have on retreat. And advance after combat, it doesn't prevent it. And then there's a special attack, introduces an optional rule in Operation Unthinkable, where if I move next to an enemy unit, instead of actually doing combat, I can probe attack, which means I can move into a unoccupied, a hex with an EZOC, enemy ZOC, but unoccupied. And then we'll see later I can follow that up with a momentum attack. But that's only from one hex. And again, surrounding a unit doesn't really help from the point of view of combat and retreat. But we will see if I can surround the unit and cut it out of supply, then I have its defensive factor. And supply is checked both at the beginning of movement and the beginning of combat. Oh, and stacking applies at all times. That was the other thing I didn't mention here. Stacking rules are in effect all through every phase. So be careful for those bottlenecks. Let's see, EZOCs do not prohibit another. Yeah, so you can paradrop into an EZOC. You can't paradrop into an enemy unit. You can't paradrop into an enemy garrison. Okay. Access supply. Boil it down. You can have a supply line of any length to a source of supply. Enemies' zones of controls are only negated by friendly units. And the source of supply for the Axis for the Germans is their beachhead marker, and then any city port, any city on the coast of the Atlantic. Japanese, the same thing, their beachhead marker, and any city on the Pacific coast. The effect is halving of both movement and combat. I believe it's rounded up. They don't talk about, I think, I gotta find it. U.S. supply comes from any city. Wait, supply in U.S. units are always automatically in supply. Woohoo. Okay. That's, I can't believe I missed that. U.S. units are never out of supply. So it only applies to the Axis. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, you can't go through a U.S. controlled city. You got to take it. That pretty much it acts as an EZOC for supply lines for the access. You'd say it'd be negated by a German unit in the city, but that would of course mean the Germans have taken the city, so it's irrelevant. And you can't trace across the theater boundary either. But again, that only applies to Axis units. Movement factor is halved. Round up all remainders. Looks like the rules are pretty much round up for halving. Both combat. Round up all remainders. There it is. So that's the rule. Round up. And nobody's eliminated from being out of supply. They're just halved. German supply sources, beachhead marker, friendly controlled U.S. Atlantic coast part, unless it's got a mushroom on it, while the mushroom cloud is there, which is removed at the end of the turn. Japanese the same. Yeah, and the Germans can't use the Gulf because they're saying their transoceanic supply system is stretched. Sorry about that. I got my random turn off the headset. Baltimore may only be used if they also control DC and the 4 other land hexes, Chesapeake. Vancouver and Seattle are potential ports for the Japanese. Yeah, way up here. But then we come down here in the obvious ones: San Francisco, LA, San Diego. Okay. Say those are the ports there too. And also, if any Axis unit is literally in a coastal hex, they are in supply. Mushroom clouds, no supply, but it'll go away. Their beachhead markers exert no ZOC, but they do have a defensive factor of 1. Reinforcements during the reinforcement phase. And you can see I can only land 3 units for each side at the beginning, so all the rest of these units are reinforcements for the Japanese, and the same with the Germans. Each Axis player may bring into play up to 6 units from his pool onto the map. And they may come ashore via invasion or any friendly control port. But remember, stacking always applies. So Got to clear some room for them to come in. No mushroom clouds. Each turn, both Axis players each receive one step of elite replacement and one step of regular. Each regular may only be used to raise of a regular unit on the map in supply. That's all it needs. On the map in supply, and they can be replaced. Each elite can be used for elite. And there's no accumulation. Got to use those replacement points. And no Axis unit, once fully eliminated, may ever be recreated or brought back into play. US units, all of them are in play at the start of the game. So what we then use the cup for, once we've set up and emptied it, is as US units are eliminated, they are put back in the cup, and that's the replacement pool. And starting on turn 2, alternately pick units blindly from the pool one at a time. And for the East Coast, every 5 city control points still in US control allows 1 pick. For the West Coast, they need 10. Interesting. And you just pull them out. And they're immediately placed on a friendly controlled city hex in the appropriate theater within stacking limit. And if the pool is emptied, they don't accumulate. Again, replacements don't get accumulated. And then reduced US elite units, if they're in supply in a friendly city, can be rebuilt up. But the exception is the BEF and the Anzac are irreplaceable. Once they're gone, they're gone. Movement. City garrison units never move. This is all standard movements. No minimum movement. All the rest of this is about common wargaming rules, about stacks and movement. I'll leave that. Here's the natural terrain and water barriers. There was the waterways are unique. Grand Cooper Canyon we've seen too. Terrain effects chart covers that. Clear terrain, 1 MP. Rough, 2 MP unless you're the 20th Mountain Army, German, then it's 1. Mountains, 3 MP unless you're the 20th Mountain, and it's only 1 MP. And then these hex sides, the Grand and Cooper Canyon, may not be crossed by any unit, nor may supply be traced, nor do ZOCs extend. Okay, there it is, the canyon. Inland waterway. That's what I was talking about, those blue lines on the eastern theater of operations. Any US or German unit that's in a friendly controlled city hex. It's from city hex to city hex. May move from there to potentially any other friendly controlled city hex. Kind of like the Union in the Civil War. Does not enter an EZOC. You can't enter an enemy ZOC, EZOC, or adjacent to an enemy controlled seat. And friendly units do not negate. So the only time really they do negate is supply. All sea lakes, well, January, Feb freeze turn, they all freeze, but you can move across them, but you can't end a freeze turn in a frozen lake hex because the next turn it thaws, and so it's mainly for transit. Maybe get around a line or something. Nothing special with cities. This is an interesting rule. No US units can go into Tulsa. And Axis units can only do it advancing after combat by pretty much getting in combat with the 6 strength point garrison there. And then when they do, that's sudden death, end of the game. Okay. And then along with that waterway special movement, there is strat move, supplied Axis and US units as long as they don't start in an EZOC, end in an EZOC, they can double their movement. Friendly unit or stack does not negate. Again, does not negate. Okay. Then they talk about German airdrop. They can drop from either off map, in the reinforcement pool, or in a city hex. If they're in an in-supply city hex, it's apparently where the airfield is made. But they can't do it within the range of a U.S. air power marker. Also, they can't drop on garrison or U.S. units. And then the special rule to prevent the coup de grace, I guess. They cannot drop in Tulsa or the 3 hexes surrounding it, 6 hexes, whichever. And when they do drop, special rules here, they can do combat only if it was a move fight combo. If it was a fight move, the fight's already done. Okay. Then they have to roll on the, do I have it here? Yep. Roll on the airdrop results table. You see what strength they land at. This is kind of a greater than 1 or more, you're okay. But if you get a 0 or less, you're going to start losing stuff. And here's a -1 automatic. And if it's in an EZOC, it's another -1. If it's rough, it's another -1. If it's mountain, -2. So you do pay a price for dropping in an EZOC. That's going to be a -2 right out of the box. If it's clear, you're going to have a -2. And which means if you roll a 1 or 2, you're going to start losing stuff. And then the U.S. 18th Airborne, well, it doesn't have 4 steps, so it's a likelihood it kind of dies when it drops if it doesn't work out. And yeah, then they talk about the U.S. Airborne. Must be in a city, and it must be in its full 2-step strength. And it can drop on any hex that does not have an Axis mobile or garrison unit. Never dropped on Tulsa. Then you roll a die. If it survives, it can't move, but it can fight if it was a move fight. Otherwise, it's just there. Then we have combat, pretty much voluntary. Units can't divide up their attack factors. Defenders in the same hex must be combined. You can't attack more than 1 hex at a time. You don't have to designate your attacks ahead of time. You can do them in any order you want. Yeah, all units in the stack don't even have to participate. Pretty voluntary. And you basically add up all the attack factors, all the defense factors, subtract defense from attack, and that gives you something on the CRT table here. But there are differential shifts. We did see if I lead with a fight or combat, that's a prepared attack. So I get a 1R for that one. Some other shifts. Clear doesn't give anything. Rough gives a 1L to the defender. Rougher mountain receive a 1L, and that should be in the TEC here. Clear, 1L, 1L. City gives 2 L's, and you can't do a consent. That's a surrounded attack. Yeah, can't attack across. And there's some special rules around here about waterways. If you attack from the adjacent waterway, you're good, but if you attack from a non-waterway, the defender gets a 1L. Let's see. So our shifts can be because of, like we said here, rough and mountain give 1L. Waterways potentially give 1L to the defender, but not during the freeze turn. Or if the defending on the waterway at any time being attacked by 1 or more enemy units from an adjacent waterway hex, physically connected, attacking along it. Yeah, except for the invasion turn, no attacks across ocean. Cities and garrisons, 2-column shift, 2L. Tulsa, here we go, intrinsic 1-step garrison unit. Now this one actually exerts a ZOC and has a defensive strength of 6 and gets the 2L shift. Air power, we did talk about before, that can shift it. Concentric attack, that's the surrounded from opposite, or maybe 1, 2, 3, or yeah, 1, 2, 3. And the concentric shift is 2 columns to the right. That's a big one. Okay. So if you can get concentric, that's good, except it doesn't apply in city hexes. No concentric, so those are tough nuts to crack. Then you roll the results, and it's a simple, to the left is attacker steps, to the right is defender steps lost, and then you just take it out. Any garrison units are last. Less than 0 are the 0 column. Greater than 30 are resolved on the 30 column. Okay, that makes sense. And that's it. And then if the defender hex is emptied, you can advance after. Not mandatory. Stacking limits apply. Only 1 hex. Now here are some unique attacks. Like I said, these were introduced. I caught them on BGG optional rules for Operation Unthinkable, which this game has some parallels to. A momentum attack is basically if I have a successful initial attack and I advance after combat, I am allowed from just that stack, however many units I advance now, just that stack now, not a combined multiple hex, to attack anybody adjacent to that. Okay? That's it. You can only do that once. Alright. Now, the other thing I could do is I could do a combo in this way. I could do a probing attack, such as the probing attack is kind of like an advance after combat, except I don't attack. Okay, but I advance, and then I can do a momentum attack to anything adjacent to that. So this is perhaps a way. The probing attack, well, it wouldn't apply to Americans because Americans are always in supply, but to Germans, if you could, or Japanese, if you could surround them with one attack or a probing attack, then your remaining units can attack them at half strength. That would be great. So you got probing and momentum attacks, and then the Japanese have, of course, a banzai attack. They can designate one or more units to be doing a banzai attack, doubles their combat factor, but they immediately lose one step, which doesn't apply to the combat results. So there is a price to pay for that. Anytime prior to the die roll, they can declare it. Okay. And then finally, the Manhattan Project. You did see there were 6 Manhattan Project markers, 3 per theater. And then starting in the second turn during the atomic phase, I think it was part of the strat phase, which isn't the first. If you have 3, you automatically get an A-bomb. If you have 2, 1 through 4, you get an A-bomb. If you have only 1 or 2, you get an A-bomb. You can use it right away, or you can stockpile them. Okay? And the markers have no intrinsic defense, nothing. You could probe attack into them, you could just move through them, then they're destroyed. Nothing special. And these, of course, are the placement points 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in each theater. So starting turn 2, the US player will, in the strat phase, get probably an atomic bomb that they can use right away or stockpile for each theater. Each theater. And an atomic bomb attack is pretty straightforward. You roll 1d6 and apply these modifiers. And they immediately take a -2 off the bat. There's no pluses, okay? So if the target hex is not in range of 1 or more US air power markers, additional -1, meaning there's only air delivery, so it's prone to interception. And if you're trying to hit a target in hex or rough, and your target are access units in non-city hexes. Okay. So, any axis occupied non-city hex on the map may be attacked. And which makes me wonder about that supply rule where you can't use a port with a mushroom, but you can't bomb a port because it's a city. So, okay, that's good to think about. But yeah, if you're trying to attack somebody in Rougher Mountain, out of the range of your air power, you've got out of the box a 2, 3, 4. So 0 means no result, nothing happens. 1, if you do get a result, that's the number of steps of access units lost, and a mushroom cloud is placed until the end of the turn. So that's pretty much the rules. Where am I at here? Yeah, 43 minutes, I think we're good. We'll just take a look at some other stuff here real quick. Here's our terrain, pretty straightforward. Flavors of green, interesting color choice. New District of Columbia, yeah, it's got that special red, looks like fortification around it. There's the Grand Inland Waterway, all lake, yep. So we've seen that. There's our combat results table. Yeah, these are all the tables we were just looking at over there. So I think in my next video, I am going to do the setup. And the setup will involve placing units along the coast here. And I think it's going to be 13 plus 3. They're going to have a total of, no wait, it's 16 plus 3. So they're going to have 19 units. And just looking at this, yeah, we don't want them to take a port hex right away. I like this is all rough here along the edge. Definitely want to occupy ports. Don't want to give them an easy. Probably want to occupy Mexicala. They're in it with us too. And then that way, no matter what they do in the Baja, we've at least sealed it off. Or they could go north. I mean, you got Seattle and Vancouver, but these are not ports. So if you do go north, you got to take these ports probably. So I would say for the Japanese that, well, if you take ports with the beachhead, I think you'll be able to bring reinforcements in faster. But you could land here unoccupied and just start expanding from here, and it'd be hard for the U.S. to quickly respond on that first turn. So maybe you could make some progress. Interesting. So I'd say, yeah, you could invade here, you could invade here, you could invade somewhere in here, or you'd invade somewhere up here. Okay, coming over to the here. Wow, there's a lot of cities here. I am so drawn to here, actually looking at it. I am not drawn to down here because you can easily be bottled off. And the key thing is there are no second invasions. So wherever you invade, you're stuck as the axis. So, and here, I don't know, it depends on the US setup. This is a lot of ground to cover with, looks like 19 units. So, we'll see. Okay, I think I'll end it here. And the next time we come back, I'll have done the US setup and we'll do the initial Axis invasions. So, thanks for listening. If you like, please click a like. If you subscribe, you'll be notified when the next installment is provided for the Axis invasion of the US. Otherwise, have a great day and catch you at the next recording.